My name's Lauren Paulson, and today I want to teach you about constant velocity. Today I'm going to do an experiment where I try and accelerate myself in my wheelchair to a constant velocity, and I have an accelerometer on me, which I'm going to use to try and track my acceleration and keep it as close to zero as possible. Let's see how this goes.
Now, what physics concepts does this experiment cover? It covers velocity, friction, acceleration, force, Newton's first law, and Newton's second law. I started my experiment from a standstill, which meant I had to accelerate up to a constant velocity. Once I was at that constant velocity, I tried to keep a close eye on the accelerometer, keeping the acceleration as close to zero as possible. Although this was quite difficult due to the multitude of forces acting on me. There was the force of me pushing forward on the wheelchair. There was also the friction force of the ground, which due to it being a concrete pavement was very high. After I performed my experiment, I went into Tracker to see my true position over time and velocity over time graph. As you can see, my position over time graph looks fairly straight after the acceleration period. However, once we open up the velocity over time graph, we can see how truly inconsistent my velocity was. Now, this is probably due to the high forces which I explained earlier. There's again the inconsistent human error of me pushing on the wheelchair and the high friction force of the ground, which are very, very difficult to balance out those two forces to get a net force of zero. I then wanted to use GlowScript to represent my experiment. The first thing I did was change the radius of the ball. I made the radius about the size of the radius of me in the wheelchair. The next thing I wanted to change was the velocity. The velocity I ended up using was the slope of the line of best fit from my tracker data, so that the velocity would be as close as possible to my tracker data while remaining a constant velocity. I then went into Excel to create a graph that could compare both the data from my tracker data of the real experiment and the GlowScript data from the GlowScript simulated experiment. Now, the GlowScript simulated experiment had a completely straight line of position over time because it had a consistent velocity. Now, we can see the blue line is not straight and differs a little bit from the red line in some areas. This is because the velocity was not completely constant in the real experiment, as I've stated before, due to the inconsistencies of me pushing and the friction force not always equal. This caused me to accelerate in some periods of time and decelerate during some periods of time. And although there was a bit of error, I'm overall very happy with this experiment because the error is so small, as you can see, compared to that red line, that I think I did actually quite a good job as a human trying to get as close to zero velocity as possible. This experiment just goes to show how difficult getting a constant velocity is. In fact, one of the few times you'll see a constant velocity in real life is when that constant velocity is a velocity of zero. This is because the object is not moving. Once an object starts moving, though, there's often friction forces and drag working against it. And working against those friction and drag forces will almost never be consistently equal, making an inconsistent velocity. Thank you so much for watching. I hope I was able to teach you something new, or at the least show you physics concepts in a way you may have not thought about them before.